Welcome to my presentation titled Transforming Practice from Using Play to Enabling Play via Environmental Evaluation. My name is Thomas Morgenthaler. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University College Cork and Queen Margaret University, Edinburgh, Scotland. At that point, I would also like to acknowledge my co-authors and supervisors, Dr. Helen Lynch from University College Cork, Assistant Professor Dr. Janet Loebach from Cornell University in New York, Dr. Duncan Pendland from Queen Margaret University, Edinburgh, Scotland, and Professor Dr. Christina Schulze from Zurich University of Applied Sciences in Switzerland. As occupational therapists and practitioners in sensory integration, we know about the importance of play occupations. What is less known is that play is also recognized as a right for all children under Article 31 in the United Nations Conventions of the Rights of the Child. One key point that is emphasized in Article 31 is the need to acknowledge play for its own sake and not use play for other means. However, in practice, including in occupational therapy, we often use play for other purposes, such as to improve abilities, to teach children skills, as a window to development through assessment and evaluation, or as a reward for tasks directed by adults. The United Nations Conventions of the Rights of the Children suggests that one way to support play for its own sake is to ensure the optimal environment and environmental conditions for play. In this presentation, I will focus specifically on the physical environment and the physical environmental characteristics of playgrounds. I will utilize the theory of affordances, which underpins my research studies and what I think is a very useful yet underappreciated theory in occupational therapy practice today. So what is an affordance? The theory of affordances was developed from an ecological psychologist, James Jeremy Gibson, in the 50s and 60s. From there, it has been further extended in various different disciplines, for instance, in environmental psychology, in architecture, in human design thinking, but also in occupational therapy and occupational science. For example, Theresa May Benson used the theory of affordances to underpin her evaluation of the assessment for ideational praxis, which some of you may be also familiar with. You can think about affordances as a perceptual idea. Gibson described that how we perceive the world is what we can do in the world. In other words, affordances are possibilities for actions that a child is first perceiving and then may actualize. You can also think about affordances as a relational concept. That means that we only perceive an affordances when we relate to the functional qualities of the physical environment. A child will relate to these qualities and then engage in an occupation in the immediate environment. Let's look at an example. As you can see here in the first picture, this is a playground in Vienna. It just has rained and a puddle has formed. So you can think now about that environment. How will this child use this environment? In this specific example, the child related to the environment in a way of like, I can run through the puddle, I can jump in the middle of the puddle, I can turn around in the puddle, I can splash with the water. This child has not actualized potential affordances such as getting a stone and throwing it in the puddle, jumping in the puddle, see the water rise beyond the rim of the puddle and come back. As you can see, affordances are relational. The affordance might change when the puddle starts to dry out, or when there is two children involved in that play. There may be a different kind of affordances actualized in that situation. For this study, we used the theory of affordances to investigate the relationship between the functional qualities of the environment and the community play spaces and the children's outdoor play. We looked at empirical evidence, specifically the physical environment, and we developed the environmental taxonomy of outdoor play space features. We anticipate that such knowledge will be helpful to evaluate existing play spaces for their potential play affordances. This is a very, very useful approach that is evidence-informed and that helps research and practice application. For this specific study, we conducted a secondary analysis of research papers that we previously identified in the scoping review. This original scoping review included 51 papers, and here we focused more on children's lived experience and environment connections. However, in the secondary analysis, we only used a subsample of 45 papers and had a specific focus of the physical environment play transactions. Our analysis was a structured content analysis, and the unit of analysis was the physical environment play transactions. Specifically, we looked at parts of the text that described spaces, so where children played, objects and materials, so with what children played. Specifically also for the spaces and objects, we looked also at the environmental characteristics, what were described in the papers, that allows us to get a deeper understanding of that environments. We were also interested in the play affordances, so what children actually played in that spaces. In the second phase, we grouped those codes together and formed categories of spaces and objects. And with the play affordances, we utilized a second tool, the tool for observing play outdoors, what was a observational protocol actually developed from Loerbach and Korks, one of our co-authors in that paper. In that tool for observing play outdoors, Loerbach and Korks developed a typology of outdoor play types, what consists of 9 different play types specifically for outdoor play. That was a very useful tool for us to group together and cluster the identified play affordances. In the last phase, we brought back together the spaces, objects, and the play affordances to form the environmental taxonomy. To give you an overview about these papers we included. In total, we included 45 papers, reaching from 1974 to 2023. Most of these papers originated from Europe, but there were also 10 papers from Australia and New Zealand. Most of the papers were qualitative. The population was children with and without disabilities, whereas you can see the minority of the papers, or there were less papers that included children with disabilities or a mixed sample. The playground locations included school playgrounds and public spaces. And we looked at different locations of the playgrounds, for instance, in inner cities, in suburban or rural environments. The final taxonomy, we named it the Environmental Taxonomy of Outdoor Play Space Features, consists of 14 different categories that are depicted here in that slides. I will not go into depth with each of these different environmental categories. I will just give you one example. Something that I also wanted to highlight is that we were able to identify over 280 different distinct play affordances, what is a great diversity of play affordances identified in that research papers. As you can see, the environmental taxonomy of outdoor play space features consists of 3 aspects. In the first column, you see an example of a category, enclosed and bounded spaces. In the middle column is a description of the functional qualities that we have identified that describe that category. And in the third column, there are some examples of play affordances. For this specific example, enclosed and bounded spaces, the functional qualities are, for instance, that this category is about fully or partly enclosed spaces that give the child some shielding and hiding qualities. It is a bounded space that may include some change in surface pattern. For instance, that could be a dry patch of grass that gives the child the impression of a space in a space kind of feeling. It is usually scaled to a smaller group of children, meaning that, for instance, I can be together with my best friend. It gives the child or it affords some kind of privacy or semi-privacy space, what means like the child has the opportunity for some seclusion to control this environment. I know what is going on in that environment. And it could be either human constructed or it could be a natural environment. For instance, a natural environment could be a nest formed with long grass or low-hanging canopies from a tree. Some potential affordances are experienced being inside somewhere, diverse imaginative play, such as playing house, caged animals, cops and robbers, gives the children the affordance of withdrawing, resting, looking out from, or hiding, or it could be a social opportunity like sitting together with one of my peers. On that point, I also wanted to say that this affordances are here in that smaller version of the taxonomy are just some of the affordances we have identified. The full scope of the environmental taxonomy is found in the appendix document of the publication. We also wanted to introduce to you some suggestions of this taxonomy for practice. We anticipate that the taxonomy, as it provides us a terminology, allows us active communication in an interdisciplinary field. In playground research, for instance, you will, in practice, you will work together, for instance, with landscape architects, school playground management staff, municipality people who are responsible for upkeep, and the taxonomy can serve as a shared communication tool between that professions. The taxonomy also allows us to give us a shift from adult-centered perspective to a child-centered perspective. The children focus more on what can I do in this environment, and the taxonomy actually allows us to look more at environments and anticipate what is potentially available in the space. What can a child do in the space? This is very helpful for occupational therapy because it centers around the children's doings, what is also our core practice area. The third example is that it allows us and gives us an evidence-informed justification when we do environmental interventions. For instance, it allows us to find specific features or environmental qualities that are missing on a play space, and it allows us to give a justification why we need to make a change in a playground. If you want to read more about the research that I have presented today, I would love to invite you to scan that QR code where it directly brings you to the article that we have published on the taxonomy.